On the fourth Sunday of Lent, we are once again given a very rich, very meaningful gospel passage. And this Sunday, it's the story of the man born blind that we find in John chapter 9. Christ's encounter with this man and his healing of this man who was blind from birth. And just like the gospel reading last Sunday of Christ's encounter with the Samaritan woman at the well, there's so much richness here that we can't cover it all in one brief reflection. So I want to focus in just on one aspect, and that is healing from spiritual blindness. You see, all of the healing miracles that Christ comes to offer us, all the healing miracles that we read about in the gospel, they're signs that point to a richer and more lasting spiritual healing. If all they were physical healings, then they'd all just be temporary, and we can say, what's the point? By that I mean, this man's eyes were restored to sight miraculously by Christ, and that's wonderful, but eventually they ceased to function again. Eventually that man's eyes no longer saw the light because that man died. Even the greatest healing miracle that Christ performed, the raising of Lazarus from the dead, was temporary because Lazarus one day died again. So the physical healings that Christ performs, including this one, are there to point us towards a deeper spiritual healing that he comes to offer that won't expire, right? That can last until eternity. And this is brought out in a reflection by Saint Theophilus of Antioch. He was Bishop of Antioch. And I mention this because several days ago, on Wednesday this past week, we got this reading from Theophilus in the office of readings as part of the Liturgy of the Hours. And Theophilus talks about this aspect of blindness. And he mentions that, all men have eyes, but some are naturally blind. Some men's eyes are shrouded in darkness because of physical blindness, and so they can't see. But he says just because they can't see the sun shining doesn't mean that the sun has ceased to shine. It doesn't mean that the sun doesn't exist just because they're unable to see it. And likewise, many men are spiritually blind. Their mind's eye has become blind to God's goodness and his presence because of their sins and their evil deeds. But just because they can't perceive God because of their spiritual blindness, it doesn't mean God doesn't exist any longer, and it doesn't mean that God doesn't continue to pour out his grace upon us. We're just not able to perceive that. And it's very interesting, the comparison that he makes. I'll read this brief passage. He says, a person's soul should be clean, like a mirror reflecting light. If there is rust on the mirror, his face cannot be seen in it. In the same way, no one who has sin within him can see God. Right? And I love this comparison he makes with a mirror, because what do we do in a mirror, right? We see ourselves. We see ourselves reflected. But of course, if that mirror is dirty, right, and you can think of sin as dirt on that mirror, if that mirror is dirty, we can't see our own reflection. Our reflection is marred, right? But we use a mirror to see ourselves. What does this have to do with seeing God? Aren't we talking about seeing God? Well, yes, but we're made in the image and likeness of God. And so if we sin, we're marring that likeness of God that is naturally ours. And so not only are we prevented from seeing God by our sin, but we're prevented from seeing that image of God reflected in us, which is where we should see it. Right? Of everything that God made in creation, only of man does Genesis say that we're created in the image and likeness of God. Nothing else in the world is made in the image and likeness of God. It all reflects some aspect of God's goodness because it's all the work of God's creative essence. But only we are made in the image and likeness of God. So if we're going to see God in this world, the place that we should be able to see God the most is in ourselves and in one another. But if we sin, that likeness to God is damaged. It's like a mirror that's covered in rust, and we can't see God's reflection in ourselves. So it's a beautiful way of thinking about this. But Theophilus continues, and he says, but if you will, you can be healed. If you will, you can be healed. You can be healed of this spiritual blindness. How do we do that? He says, hand yourself over to the doctor, and he will open the eyes of your mind and heart. Who is this doctor? It is God who heals and gives life through his word and wisdom. Jesus is called the divine physician, and we see this in the healing miracles that he performs, including this healing of the man born blind, and we see it also in the way that he comes to heal our souls. As much as this gospel today, or this Sunday, is about this physical healing, at the end of the gospel, and it's a lengthy gospel passage, but at the end, it's no longer about the physical miracle of this man's healing, but it's about the spiritual healing that it brought about. Right? Jesus finds the man and says, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" And he answered and he said, "Who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "I do believe, Lord." And he worshiped him. Then Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see might see, and those who do see might become blind." So this is the crux of the matter. This is why Jesus came into the world, so that those who do not see, those whose mind's eyes have been blinded by sin and evil, may be healed, may be cured of that spiritual blindness by the divine physician, so that they might see, so that they might be aware of God's reality and his goodness and the graces that he bestows upon us, so that we might come to him and worship him, reflecting that goodness in our own lives, in our own minds, in our own hearts. Praise be Jesus Christ.